Every CEO in every company, in every industry, in every country is talking about AI at the same time. That has never happened. That did not happen with cloud. That did not happen with any innovation. Some folks that believe it's better to be away from the government, not engage with them, and sort of continue to build a little bit like we have in the last 15 years of the social media era, frankly. And the organizations that signed the pledge, where the belief is maybe it's better to collaborate, maybe it's better to help educate DC and the policymakers on how to think about these issues. Maybe it's better to help them understand that rather than regulating the technology itself, we should regulate at the application layer, how it's adopted in industries like healthcare and education and other areas where it actually touches humans.
Hello and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm David J. Lynch, Global Economics Correspondent here at the Post. Today I'm joined by Hemant Taneja, CEO of venture capital firm General Catalyst, an early investor in companies like Snap and Stripe. He's an important voice in the debate over artificial intelligence, and we have a lot to talk about. Hemant Taneja, welcome to Washington Post Live.
Excited to be here, David. Thank you.
I want to start with something very basic. As you can probably tell, I'm old enough to remember the world before smartphones, the world before the internet, although not the world before electricity. And I remember looking back, it strikes me that it was just very difficult to fully understand how much life was going to change by virtue of these technologies. So I wonder if you could start by just giving our viewers a sense of how much in their daily lives will be different 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because of the rise of AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. When you take a step back and think about what the world was like in 2006, before the iPhone, Facebook Connect, Amazon Web Services, all these pieces came together, the social mobile cloud, and you started organizing society on the internet, it was very different from today. You can press a button and food arrives at your door. You can press a button and a car shows up. There's so many things that get done for you that you didn't used to think about. You don't think about anymore. And those were places where a lot of your cognitive loads were going, just 15 years ago. Now, a lot of that magical experience got done simply by creating a better connection through devices with each other, with the physical assets in the world. We're now in this phase, and I've sort of said this before, that we're actually in this 30-year cycle of digitization of society that we're going through, where it's only going to hyper accelerate. What AI is enabling is bringing that magic to the absolute next level. Because before, while it could do certain kinds of actions and sort of pull workflows together, now it can do thinking at a much deeper level as well. And frankly, across all kinds of cognitive skills, whether you're a physician or a teacher or what have you. And so the way we think about work itself is going to be fundamentally transformed in this next phase, and that's going to be magical.
And you've also written, though, in the pages of the Washington Post sometime last year, that we're at a quote-unquote perilous moment with the AI revolution. What's the peril, and how well are we meeting the challenge?
Look, if you think about the last 15 years, and I've talked about this before, somehow the move fast and break things engineering design principle became a societal design principle. And we started doing these tests at the expense of human lives and the impact on them with technology, just to make sure our products were getting adopted faster. I think what happened last year with ChatGPT hitting the zeitgeist just over a year ago is that that's about to hyper accelerate. And the concern that I have is that we can let this technology develop in a free-form serendipitous way, and it could go down a path where it's essentially automating us out of work that gives us a lot of purpose, or we can be very intentional about augmenting human potential with AI. So we're at this fork in the road, and what we really need is intentionality. And as innovators in the ecosystem, building trust with society and how we're going to move towards that intentional view of the world. And if we don't, then I think the issues we had with social media and the first phase of digitization of society will get way more compounded and lead to many more issues than we've had over the last few years, which has not been insignificant. And that's what I worry about. I do worry about sort of letting technology happen to us versus reining it in to augment human potential.
So, just how disruptive do you think this will be? Broad introduction of AI throughout the economy. How disruptive in the labor market, and do we need to rethink the sort of adjustment policies that we've had in place to deal with previous shocks that have, I think, generally have been regarded as insufficient?
So look, when I think about the adoption of AI, I think in the short term, medium term, long term way. And in the short term, it's going to create a boon. There's all these new companies that need to get created. We're going to rethink different workflows and consumer experiences and business applications with AI, and will create lots of value. In fact, for venture capital industry and the innovation industry, this is an amazing time to be thinking about the next generation of companies. No, and so many AI engineers and prompt engineers and new jobs that need to get created to enable that transition. In the medium term, it's also very exciting because when you think about what AI does, it's an answer to our teacher shortage. It's an answer to our shortage of our radiologists and physicians and nurses and sort of every practical industry. It can give us an ability to augment human potential in how many people we can service as individuals in those jobs. Long term, it's ambiguous, but it always is. Right? I mean, if you think about it, you could argue on one side, hey, if AI manifests itself in its truest form, and it can be cognitively and with robotic language models over time, physically superior to what humans can do over time, then there's a case to be made that every job can be deconstructed in those cognitive and physical skills, and machines will do it better. But we also know humans are way more innovative than that, and new jobs will emerge. So the optimist in me says, I think if we are responsible in building trust with the society and how to bring technology in, focus on these short and medium term opportunities with great intentionality and responsibility, then I think in the long term, we will find a way to say what's post this world where the artificial intelligence is just part of how we engage in society.
Now, there's also, of course, been a lot of discussion about the existential risk that some people see in AI, a threat to human survival, sort of the Terminator style outcome. You've also raised what I think is a nearer term threat in some of your writing, which I think is fascinating. The idea that AI might call into question the value of democracy itself, that authoritarian regimes equipped with sophisticated AI will simply be better at governing societies, lower crime rates, that sort of thing. How worried are you about that? Do you see any signs yet that that's in the cards?
Look, I do worry about that because if you think about what's happening in society today, we are reglobalizing, right? We're actually creating economic center around the Western philosophy, largely led by the US. And then you have a second center of gravity economically around China. And the principles of these two societies are fundamentally different. And what I think a lot about is that development of AI as a technology is going to be fundamentally different in these two regimes. And it's incumbent upon us to make sure businesses that are developing AI in the democratic societies ends up being the market leading businesses. But that's the tall order, because when you think about the development of AI, the more centralized you are, the more you have access to different data sources, the faster and stronger your AI is going to progress. The communist regimes are fundamentally better suited for that. And so progress can, in some ways, be made faster in those regimes. We have to counter that. We have to make sure the different democratic nations come together, think about data sharing, think about the sharing of technology in a way that AI as a whole develops faster in the I would say Western plus Indian sort of economic regimes, and can be as good or better, so there are businesses can be globally more competitive. This is what I worry about. Can we actually have a rapid pace of innovation around AI while respecting the principles of democracy, while making sure each and every nation in this reglobalized world can actually create their own compute capabilities around AI and be self-sufficient? Because this time around, it's not going to be that the United States companies only will dominate in providing AI to society. And so we have to make sure there's this new implementation model where this technology can come to market and be fast and give advantage to the Western businesses.
You've called this a digital Cold War, the race between the U.S. and China. After decades of U.S. and Chinese scientists and technologists working together to invent the next frontier of innovations, they'll now be operating in separate orbits. How do you assess the current state of play there? Is the U.S. ahead? Is it even possible for some country to be judged ahead, broadly speaking, in AI, or are there a whole suite of technologies and areas that you have to advance it across?
Yeah, look, this has been going on for a while. I would say when President Xi in 2015 started focusing on, bringing self-sufficiency in a lot of critical industries, it sort of started even back then. And obviously, the United States has been countering as well. I think this digital Cold War really got accelerated in the context of the development of AI. And because AI touches everything, I think it's going to impact how we think about defense. It's going to impact how we think about running our core infrastructure, how we run businesses, consumer services, everything. And so, United States has been, and I would argue it still is, ahead in a lot of ways, because a lot of the core IP got developed here. You've got companies like OpenAI and our cloud companies that are, fairly far advanced in adoption of AI. I feel pretty good about that. We've got leadership of companies like NVIDIA from an infrastructure standpoint. However, I mean, China realizes this. There are tens and tens of AI companies being funded over there to keep pace, and they're narrowing the gap around the semiconductor sort of disadvantages as well. So I think it's going to become very competitive very fast. And once we get there, its advantage to the more centralized regimes where it's just easier to get access to the data, regardless of consumer privacy or democratic values that you may want to uphold, and apply model building to that and leap ahead. So again, as I said, I think we have advantage for a little bit longer, but we have to really come together as an ecosystem and make sure we're set up to be the accelerants around AI innovation, while upholding our democratic values.
Yeah. I'm struck by your description of sort of the inherent advantages of a centralized system, because the argument, as you know, traditionally has been that Chinese society is not well organized for innovation because there isn't the same sort of wild west freedom that we have in Silicon Valley and elsewhere in this economy, and also that just the nature of a top-down regime is, particularly under Xi Jinping, bad news may not travel as quickly as it needs to travel up to the leader. You don't want to be the guy to go tell Xi Jinping that his prized initiative is not delivering. So isn't it just as likely that the Chinese will be hobbled by their inherent disadvantages as advantaged by some of the things you've mentioned?
First of all, I hope you're right. I would say that from a grassroots entrepreneurship to bring innovation to life versus sort of top-down company building the way Chinese government has been driving it in different industries, I think that's probably right. But AI does function differently. I think by centralizing, you will build more advantageous technologies. So take a crime as example, as you were mentioning earlier. If you can have all the surveillance data, regardless of any consumer privacy, and you can feed it into your AI systems, you'll probably build a set of monitoring technologies that fight crime better than you would in our democratic system. Well, now think about the businesses that are adopting that technology. They will fundamentally be better advantaged in the products that they're serving versus what might get built here in the US or European or Indian markets, for example. So that's the kind of example of where centralization can be an advantage, because centralization is an advantage to AI. Now we can address how we develop AI models in more decentralized ways. That's another place where we have to be thinking about it, and address data collaboration so that we can actually be decentralized and still have the data parity to be able to build these models. But that requires more collaboration and more philosophical alignment than perhaps where we are with the different countries all trying to create their own supremacy in AI in the Western world.
Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, in the advanced economies, there's been something of a backlash to varying degrees in varying places against globalization in recent years, both as a function of dislocations among less skilled, less educated workers, but also the supply chain disruptions of the pandemic, the rising geopolitical risks from the war in Ukraine and now the war in the Middle East. But I gather you're not one who thinks globalization is dead. You mentioned earlier you think we're going through a sort of reglobalization. Sketch out for me how you see that evolving and how different the coming era will be from what we've gone through over the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah, look, I think if you think about the last 35 or 40 years, what has happened is for many countries, export economy is a driver of their GDP growth. And so one of the things about globalization is, there's a lot of folks that say globalization is dead. If you think about the pandemic and the wars, countries are going to want to be self-sufficient and create their own sort of sovereign based businesses in these areas. But that's not pragmatic entirely. So I think there's this balance of how do you make sure your economy has enough scale, and you can provide a quality of living for your a country, and on the other side, how do you make sure you are resilient as a nation in the critical industries? So what we have been talking about is this whole idea that there's a reglobalization happening. When in certain critical industries, each country is going to want to think about how do we become self-sufficient as much as possible. In other industries, they will continue to say, let's remain uh, sort of behind globalization and taking advantage of global supply chains and cost efficiencies, because there's many ways to get to those products for our nation. So if you think about AI, if you think about building vaccines, because in the next pandemic, not many countries are going to want to rely on US or China or whoever for vaccines for their people. If you think about semiconductors, if you think about energy, look at what's going on in Europe around due to the war between Russia and Ukraine. I think those countries are going to want to see new businesses emerge that give them resiliency. But if you are talking about basic components or basic clothing that can be made in many different parts, what you'll see is the supply chains reshuffle. So it won't be that all the manufacturing is just in China. You've already seen India becoming a massive hub around manufacturing. Mexico's similarly got a huge opportunity. And so you'll create this reshuffling of supply chains, but you'll still take advantage of globalization in those commodity industries.
Let's turn to government regulation as we start to consider what government should do to set ground rules and establish guardrails for the development of AI. Looking back at our experience with the internet broadly, with social media in particular, what are the lessons we should take away from those experiences?
Yeah, so David, I think to me it all starts with establishing trust. What we have seen is with Moore's law and Metcalfe's law and how fast innovation is moving, the proverbial Silicon Valley, the technology industry keeps running way far ahead of DC and the rest of society. It's been very beneficial to us. We've created some of the world's largest companies. We've created all this economic opportunity, U.S. Economic leadership, but also we have risked our democracy. We've created, more amplification of bias in society and all issues that we've gone through with social media. So to me, when I think about this next phase, uh, um, you know, it's less about regulation and how do we regulate tech. To me, it's much more about governance, self-regulation, and reestablishing trust. It's about creating radical collaboration between technology and DC so that we can uphold the spirit of regulation and build companies that have a framework of responsible innovation that they are building with, and are sort of creating businesses and scaling them in society in a way that's in the long-term interest of society.
But if self-regulation is the answer, you're always going to have rogue actors who can see profit in skirting the rules. We've tried self-regulation with finance to some degree, and we ended up with the 2008 crisis. Um, doesn't the government need to really set some boundaries, legal boundaries that have to be respected?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think my point around self-regulation a little bit is it's so early in AI. What you also don't want to do is create bad regulation that again slows down progress, given how critical this technology and the global leadership in this technology is for us. So what I was really saying is it first starts with establishing trust, having a framework of self-regulation. So you've got these guidelines with which you're building these technologies, thinking about the risks that come around this, thinking about transparency, and aligning with the long-term interests of society. I do think you need some level of regulation, but my hope is that the regulation is not about the development of the technology itself in AI, but it's much more about how it's applied when it touches humans in the different industries. And we have departments set up that think about the role of healthcare services and education and financial services, as you said, in different verticals, and how they need to interface with society and how they need to be adopted in the way that's good for our stakeholders. And I think making sure that those frameworks are adopted for these AI first companies as they become sort of more application centric absolutely needs to happen. But I think that's where that regulation should be as opposed to in the development of the technology itself. So I think it's a bit nuanced. Uh, but as I said, in order to establish trust between DC and the technology industry also needs to show that they're being a lot more intentional in the development of this technology and the adoption of the technology and how they're building it, so that gives us time for the rest of the regulation to take hold at the application layer.
And so at this early stage, do you see a jurisdiction that you think has got, broadly speaking, the right idea? What do you think of the EU's approach so far, for instance?
So we've been working with folks in the EU, and we've been working in DC as well. Look, I think everybody's figuring out what to do. There is this initial bias in the EU to over regulate quickly, but then the industry there, including some of the folks we work closely with there, pushed back and talked about this whole idea of sort of more self-regulation and working closely to think about the way the AI stuff should be developed and slow down. I think in the U.S. There were similar pressures, but when you think about the executive order or you think about the responsible AI pledge that venture capital firms and startups issued in collaboration with the Commerce Department, those are all sort of ways to say, let's start moving intentionally and let's get smarter about how to think about regulation and not jump to it. Because if we regulate too fast, an industry that's changing, and even today, a year from ChatGPT hitting the zeitgeist, we know so much more, and we're going to know so much more in the next year or two that you don't want to slow down that progress. So I think it's a balance of not regulating too fast, not over-regulating, regulating at the right layers of overall sort of innovation stack, if you will. And we got to let that come to us. And the only way we can do that while running fast at this is just having that radical collaboration between technology and the policymakers, so that we're learning and bringing everybody along, and being careful in the application in society.
I want to go back for a moment to the technology contest with China and ask you what you make of the Biden administration's approach to date. The president has tried to cut China off from the most advanced semiconductors, for instance, and the equipment needed to make them. The National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has spoken of a high fence and a small garden approach. What do you make of the administration's handling of these questions?
Yeah, look, I'm a, I believe that these are going to be short-term ways of slowing down China. I think there's a lot of talent there. They are developing the 5, 8 nanometer technologies, just like they're not that far behind. And so I think it's a way to sort of slow it down in the short term. But again, I think if the goal is global competitiveness, that's not going to be enough, because China is going to find a way to create their own supply chains. They've been at it for a while. They've got all the resources to be able to do this. We have to make sure our ecosystem continues to lead the way it always has. And we work on making sure that ecosystem, big companies and small companies, so there's a level playing field, are all able to run as fast as possible, with, again, this sort of societal responsibility in mind, so that we can uphold our democratic principles in the way we build this technology. But we have to accelerate. We have to move fast in letting our ecosystem be what it always does. It does build global companies as market leaders. So taking care of business internally is going to be the way to win long term. These are just short-term gaps.
Now, you've talked to this idea of a shared responsibility between the public and private sectors, and you were an important force behind the development of the Responsible AI Initiative, bringing together the Commerce Department and a consortium of VC firms. Tell me a little bit about what that entails and what the effort was like to herd all those cats in the same direction.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I think there's a lot of firms, investment firms, as well as technology founders that recognize that in order to really win in the long term, we have to earn this trust and create this governance framework with which we build companies in the ecosystem, so that the regulators have more trust with us and have patience in figuring out how to regulate versus regulating out of fear. And I would say, not everybody thinks that is the way to go. Some folks in Silicon Valley would say, leave us alone, let us run as fast as possible, because we want to get to market dominance. This group that came together sort of took the other position, which is, in order to really win in the long term and run really fast, we need to come together, think about standards, build trust, and collaborate between technology and policy, so that the companies that get built that are AI first in all these industries can truly be market leaders. I think everybody wants the same thing. It's a matter of sort of what's the ideology, and there's that old saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this group is very much in that camp. And I think there's more and more companies and investment firms that are signing on to this philosophy. And I think the more that happens, the more we collaborate with DC, the more we're going to create an environment that has a level playing field for startups, that enables the adoption of open source technologies carefully in the industry, moves the regulation to the application layer, and frankly creates companies that are responsible, because that's ultimately what it takes to be market leaders and compound in society for a long time.
Now, in the 30 seconds or so that we have left, I just want to ask you one question about money. Out in Silicon Valley today, fortunes are going to be made off of AI, obviously. Is there a shortage of investable capital in Silicon Valley, or a shortage of good ideas to throw it at?
Silicon Valley has lots of capital. I think there's lots of good ideas and there's lots of capital. I really do believe that. I actually, in some ways, think this is the most exciting time for entrepreneurs to be building companies, because You've got the AI cycle, you've got the whole, global resilience and reglobalization trends that we talked about, and that touches all the industries, and so and the investors see that. So the capital is mobilizing. It was tough for a couple of years because of the market corrections that happened, but I think there is a real euphoria around what's possible with AI, and it's this new cycle for the next 15 years that, to me, has clearly started, over the last year or so.
Great. Well, listen, this was a great conversation, and we could probably go all afternoon, but we are unfortunately out of time. Hemant Taneja, thanks again very much for joining us today on Washington Post Live.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching as well. Please go to WashingtonPostLive.com, register, and see what we have planned in the way of future programs. I'm David J. Lynch, your host. Thanks again for joining us.